The White Sox and Rockies could play quite possibly the worst series in the history of the game, and let's discuss on a crossover edition of Locked On White Sox and Locked On Rockies.
You are Locked On MLB Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, host of Locked On White Sox, along with Paul Holden, host of Locked On Rockies. And thank you for making Locked On White Sox and Locked On Rockies your first listen every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox and at Locked On Rockies if you've not done so already. And also follow and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. The White Sox and Rockies square off in what could be called the Loser World Series. Paul and I will discuss how this might be one of the worst matchups in baseball history. Then let's discuss which situation can get better sooner with the looming changes at the top of the organization. Finally, let's wrap up with what these two sellers should expect at the trade deadline. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Paul, I actually did watch the end of that Rockies-Houston series. And again, my sympathies to you. I totally felt it, not just because the White Sox have been losing a lot of close games this year, but I definitely was like, oh my gosh, that felt like watching a 2024 White Sox game in terms of just how tough it was to pull out a win. So hopefully your pulse has calmed down. Hopefully your, blood pressure is down. Man, that was talk about sweating one out.
That's basically been there's been maybe 3-4 wins where it hasn't had to be sweat this one out. And it's a great sign that a young bullpen, because one of the things the Rockies have turned to a really young bullpen, so not a lot of guys with a ton of experience. They can, in this moment, shine, but we've seen them come short. You look at this Rockies record and you look at the season and you'd be like, hey, they're really bad, but they've played a lot better baseball and a lot closer baseball. So, but unfortunately, they've been on the losing side so many times. And Todd, as you can relate to, it's just painful sometimes where it's just like, oh my goodness, like, not only is it just like, oh wow, they're getting something rolling, but it's just, oh, the ball has to land there. The Rockies have given up a crazy amount of infield singles this year. Like, there's just so many random little things that happen when a season is going as poorly as it is for the Rockies. That every single one of those wins feels basically like that. I think the Rockies have had very few comfortable wins in 2025.
Yeah, now I'm going to pause putting my figurative dollar and mentioning the 2024 season like I promised my audience, but that was, as you said, like that was the White Sox historically awful season to a T last year. Just not only were they just bad, but then variance just went totally against them. Balls were just dropping, right in front, like right in the spot where it's like, really that like the center fielder couldn't get to it. I mean, I don't know how many times there was a couple walk-off wins where it was just like the ball was perfectly placed there, because I noticed you guys have a fireballing closer. The White Sox last year had a fireballing closer who gave up a lot of leads like that, but it was nice to see that, hey, Rockies end up pulling out a win. So maybe they can avoid the historically awful record, which I do want to actually talk about to circle back at the end of the episode, the end of the show, because I actually don't wish it on you. But the White Sox do have big news. Colson Montgomery is reportedly set to make his big league debut. How tough are Colorado Rockies pitchers on left-handed hitting? Because the prize prospect, he provides a lot of power from the left-handed side of the plate.
Doesn't really matter left hand, right hand side. There might be some splits, and if you look into the numbers, they might show you something. But the Rockies pitching staff has not been that great. Starters, especially, have been hit pretty hard in this series. The Rockies are once again a bottom of the barrel pitching staff here in Major League Baseball. With Kyle Freeland pitching today, I believe that's going to mean. Let me pull up the starting rotation here, and. Prime example, a pitcher I am really not a big a guy that just if they can make contact against, and I haven't followed the White Sox a ton, but what I have seen is the White Sox have been scoring runs, including tagging Clayton Kershaw. It was kind of lost in the 3,000 strikeout game that the White Sox were up 4-2 in that game when that happened, including being able to use the long ball a little bit. So Antonio Senzatella, let me just read you his line: 6.69 ERA, a WHIP of 1.93 in 80 innings pitched this year. He's allowed 125 hits to 42 strikeouts, and including 31 walks in that time and 13 home runs. Left hand, right hand, it doesn't matter. People are hitting Rockies pitching. German Marquez is a different story. He's kind of been up and down, showing a little bit of flashes against himself of his prior self. He's a guy that can strike out 6-7 guys in a game. But I think to we're looking at this series opener, the White Sox can certainly come out swinging and be a big day for a prospect to make his debut. Coors Field with a guy that hasn't missed the zone and leaves balls and hit it, basically is a pitch to contact philosophy guy. Sounds like it might be a recipe for success to get a couple of your first base knocks.
Yeah, but except for when it comes to the White Sox offense, I would say, to be very gracious, it's inconsistent at best. They can really lull themselves to sleep. They're they're not very good at hitting with runners in scoring position. They're actually the worst average in the league. So there is a chance for the Rockies to actually maybe pick up a win, because the White Sox are one of the worst road teams in baseball. And that's why, I want to actually start with, let's actually get to something positive. Is there anything worth watching in the series besides Colson Montgomery making his debut?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I don't know how much. I'm sure the White Sox have at least turned to some interesting young guys. The Rockies have had some interesting performances from guys. You're going to hear the name Jordan Beck in this series. This is a guy that has started to develop into a really interesting leadoff threat for the Rockies. Just stole his 10th bag of the season there. Has been one of the few consistent pieces of the Rockies offense. A young guy as well, looking to continue to break out and establish himself, filling in for Nolan Jones after the Rockies traded him and be right before the season. This was a moment for Jordan Beck to kind of take a step forward after an early season demotion, and he has come back and has been great. Hunter Goodman, the question mark. I don't believe he played in the finale against the Astros, dealing with a hamstring, I believe. I can't remember which it was. An injury that they thought that they were going to put him on the IL, but then he came and he hit 2 bombs in a game. He's another name, easily the leading candidate for the Rockies all-star position. There are 2 young guys at the top of the Rockies order that are very interesting. And you mentioned a number 5 prospect in the White Sox system making a debut. Yanquiel Fernandez, the Rockies' number 5 prospect, just made his debut in this series as well. And he had I don't believe much on offense, but had a great throw out at home in a close game. So another guy making their debut. The Rockies this year are turning young. The Rockies are being more aggressive on the base paths after moving on to from Bud Black and going with Warren Schaefer as the interim manager. So there are some interesting names here, and these are 2 teams that kind of want to show off a little bit, I think, in this series, right? I mean, the White Sox are coming into this and saying, hey, this is a moment for us to separate ourselves from this team that's on path to be worse than us. And this is a moment for the Rockies to say, hey, we played the Marlins and we swept the Marlins. When we play the teams that are struggling this year and in our ballpark, this is finally a series for us to come out and kind of show what we can do. I think both teams can come in with a chip on their shoulder to make this, on paper, worst series ever a little bit more interesting, especially for us White Sox and Rockies fans.
Yeah, and I mean, for the White Sox too, you got young catchers Kyle Teel and Edgar Carroll still trying to make their way in big league baseball, and then you also have Brooks Baldwin. If he's the sacrificial roster lamb, he's been starting in center field for the White Sox, as Luis Robert Jr. is on the 10-day IL with a hamstring strain. And then the White Sox will have Adrian Hauser going, who has been he might steal what was assumed to be Shane Smith's all-star appearance for the White Sox. In 7 starts, he's had 3 shutout performances, and he's given up no more than 3 runs, which is not bad considering he was in the Texas Rangers minor league system after struggling so bad with the Mets that all he could get was a minor league deal. So there is some intrigue for Colorado Rockies fans and White Sox fans. But if you're on the outside, just take that out. Could this? Am I embellishing when I say this might be the worst matchup in baseball history, or is it pretty darn close?
I mean, look at the records. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, this is the worst team in the National League taking on is there any team lower than 28 wins in the American League
No, the White Sox are the worst team in the second worst team in baseball.
Yeah. So, I mean, record wise, no, but here's the deal. I mean, this is I think when you're in this situation, this is, again, if the Rockies want to avoid being the 2024 White Sox and being the worst team in modern MLB history, they've already surpassed on some other stuff. You got to win this series. This is an important series. This is a series there's going to be a surprising amount of people watching because tomorrow it's the 4th of July game. People love the fireworks. There'll be a lot of people randomly watching this Rockies White Sox series over this holiday weekend. So, while yes, on paper it could be, but this is an opportunity for both teams, right? I mean, this is a chance for the White Sox to get to 30 wins. This is the chance for the Rockies to, I believe, win their first home series of the year. And when you match up with a team like this is your chance to show that, like, we're not the bottom. You know, if the Rockies want to have an argument, some even close to a fighting chance to say, hey, we're not as bad as our record says we are, you got to win this series. And if you're the White Sox, you got to go out and say, hey, here's a home series, here's a road series we can win and take advantage of Coors Field.
All right, well, major leadership shakeups are happening at the top of both of these terrible franchises. The Sox will eventually have a new owner. The Rockies will have a new team president. Let's discuss after the break who can then leverage these changes into getting back into being competitive after the break on a crossover edition of Locked On White Sox and Locked On Rockies. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize that, hey, you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch. And they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and the lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Game Time has last-minute tickets and zone deals for big savings, like 10% off exclusive zone deals for the upcoming Cubs versus Cardinals game on July 6th. Well, it might be the Cubs. The White Sox are out of town that day, so if you want to still catch Major League Baseball over the 4th of July weekend, why not get a deal on tickets to root against the rival Cubs? Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. And download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back into a special crossover edition of Locked On White Sox, Locked On Rockies. I'm your host, Todd Welter, here with Paul Holden, host of Locked On Rockies. And again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox or at Locked On Rockies if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox and Locked On Rockies is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Okay, so the Rockies have the owner's son now in charge, and the White Sox will likely get new ownership by 2029. While Walker Monfort sounds like a Nepo promotion, it does sound like he might know something about baseball. So is that going to help turn things around sooner for the Rockies than, say, the White Sox? Because we got to wait now 4 more years until we can finally potentially get rid of our cheap owner.
Here's the deal. I want to be able to separate and say, hey, he's worked in baseball his whole career. He's been around the Rockies. Just because he is the son of the owner doesn't mean that the 38-year-old can't bring fresh new ideas into the system. But we are asking Rockies fans to continue to buy in and believe that the internal hires that they can constantly and continuously do are going to be the thing that will finally turn around a franchise that's never won the division. And let's be honest, had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that got them to the World Series. Not even World Series championships like the White Sox have. So I want to give some benefit of the doubt. But when you tell Rockies fans, in the wake of possibly the worst season in modern baseball history or possibly recorded baseball history, that the answer is to hire from within again and hire your son, who now that makes 2 sons in positions. The director of scouting is also a son, and his brother is ownership. The Monfort ownership and control is far too much and far too great for my liking. This team is desperate for outside perspective. This team is desperate for someone to come in and shake up what happens and shake up the status quo, because the Rockies could be a very fascinating and cool team, a unique environment that draws audience and draws crowds that could take over not the biggest market sizes, but landmass size, a massive part of the United States when you're talking about interest from other places, and making it something that could be regionally a really, really cool baseball team. Because when the Rockies are good, Rockies fans are there and they're passionate. So, sure, it is a change. It is something different, but I have my doubts. I have my hesitations, and I have very little confidence in any part of the ownership and the front office structure of this team. They say they're going to look outside the organization, but no, they just hire from within again. And so I don't know. I don't think massive change. I don't think we'll see. Until this team proves it, until this team demonstrates it, especially from a front office side and a player development side, I have my doubts all the way. But it's a change, so I guess there's that.
Well, okay, so you basically said the key trigger word that pretty much any White Sox fan listening, insular, because that's the White Sox organization to a T, and that's how they got to that horrific state last year, was just part of this insular thinking that it was still 2005. And not only that, when when Jerry Reinsdorf finally fired Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams, longtime front office execs, he didn't do a Nepo hire, but he still didn't he didn't interview a single soul. He just promoted Chris Getz, who was the director of player development. And one of the reasons why the Sox decayed so bad was because they just didn't have a good player development system. Now, on the flip side, it sounds like, how in your situation, Getz, it may sound like he kind of knew what the problems were and had some solutions, but just couldn't implement them because of his bosses probably thinking, insular is that way. But it is just amazing how two organizations and how just baseball lets things be run so poorly. Because, for example, I mean, how bad of a look is this for baseball now that you potentially have, for the second year in a row, an historically awful record being broken? I mean, the White Sox broke a record that lasted for 62 years, and it was only set because it was a expansion franchise. You should not be losing this many games in the modern day baseball with the amount of technology that you have, with the amount of data, the amount of resources that you have. I mean, you've got to really be that incompetent, or as you said, that insular and stuck in your ways to be this bad.
Yeah, and not to mention the A's, they didn't set the record, but they were on track to, they were on pace to be one of the worst teams. It is now 3 seasons in a row where we are having teams lose games at a never before seen rate. And look at even the mess that's going on with the A's behind the scenes as well with their ownership. Crazy. The 3 teams that are all on that thing all have problems with ownership. Crazy. And the Rockies are in such a different position than these other teams. They could be an interesting and fascinating team, but they're convinced that it has to be their way. And then in the offseason, they complain about the Dodgers. Listen, it's no secret the Rockies are in the best division in baseball. The NOS is absolutely loaded. But so instead of rising to the challenge, instead of getting creative, instead of being a team like the Giants that always seems to stay relevant, even without going, they make big splashes and do things, but instead of being a team that looks for creative solutions, they've allowed themselves to continue to fall further and further and further behind, not only their division, but the game of baseball, and then have the audacity to just cry foul because the Dodgers can spend money. Listen, you can have your griefs about the Dodgers spending money, but if you want to compete in your division, you have to go out and sign players. The Rockies' big offseason addition this year was Thairo Estrada, and he has played well after being hurt for the vast majority of the first part of the season. So it's just like, it's their responsibility to build a winning team and not give me excuse after excuse after excuse after excuse when the Rockies are now, they had never lost had a 100 loss season, and now they are approaching their 3rd straight 100 loss season and possibly the worst season win-loss record of all time. That's unacceptable from their end, and the players, as much as I don't want to fault them, and they just don't, there's development questions. Why does this team strike out 10, 11 times a game constantly? Where's the preparation? Why can't you help these guys break some of these habits and make them into major league hitters like we've seen in the past? It's just a really, really frustrating situation all the way around. And you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like the question has to be asked, are these teams bad for baseball?
Yeah, and I feel like we're kindred spirits right now because of all the stuff that you said. Like, the White Sox, except for, and I'll ask you this because it does seem like the White Sox, like we are starting to get the cloud, like a little bit of ray of sunshine breaking through. We're starting to see maybe some shadows of, hey, this could potentially have the core of a good team, but they need a lot of more pieces, but they have some core players that you could be like, okay, you can proceed forward with. And one of the things that they did do that I think that again gives at least where they're starting to break out from this insular nature is they brought in two guys to actually be in charge of their hitting and their pitching throughout the entire organization. So everybody's going to hit and pitch the same way throughout there. And they brought Brian Bannister in from the San Francisco Giants and the Boston Red Sox. And then they brought in Ryan Fuller from the Baltimore Orioles. So they're implementing new strategies. And then they went out and got Will Venable, who, yes, right now we're not very happy with his bullpen decisions, but he's still a very modern thinking person. So just because at the top you don't get the change, you can still get some change at the key play pieces. And that's why it's like, just listening to you, and I don't want to, that I'll give you your time then to respond. It just seems like the White Sox might be able to turn things around a little bit quicker.
Yeah, I mean, the Rockies have continuously declined since the basically their playoff years from back-to-back playoffs. They have constantly lost more games, lost more players, not had players, to develop. And until they, like I said, until they prove that they can, turn things around, we'll wait and see. They brought Bud Black in again this year with really no reason to do that, and then fired him as kind of a scapegoatish type thing. Bud Black was just using the lineup he had. And now Warren Schaefer, I think, is implementing things, making things this a little bit more of a modern kind of focus team. I think the ship had sailed on Black's leadership a while ago, and this team is responding a little bit. The one thing that's a good thing about the positive sign about the Rockies is that the vibes are actually like they're not a bad locker room. There's not locker room problems. There's not this. They understand where they're at, and you kind of wish they just haven't learned how to win yet. But the big question, I think, for who turns it around quicker, the White Sox have already done it. The Rockies need to sell as much as possible at the deadline, and they have never really shown that. And there's some interesting candidates there. The numbers aren't going to be impressive, but they're what they've shown as major league veterans could be enticing for some teams here at the deadline.
And that's a great segue into what we want to discuss after the break on a special crossover edition of Locked On White Sox, Locked On Rockies. And welcome back into a crossover edition of Locked On White Sox, Locked On Rockies. I'm your host, Todd Welter with Locked On White Sox. I'm here with Paul Holden, host of Locked On Rockies. And shout out to all our everydayers. We appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans and Rocky fans, friends, to subscribe to either the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox or at Locked On Rockies. I subscribe to at Locked On Rockies. I check out the show every now and again because, listen, I part of me, I'm kind of back and forth like, man, I would really love for the White Sox to already get rid of that historically awful record. But at the same point, it's like, I don't want anybody to have to go through this. I mean, just like Mets, Mets fans, it was the same way. There was a lot of Mets fans, and I had some Mets folks on. They were like, well, yeah, we want that gone. But at the same time, the Amazons kind of led to that 69 World Series. So it's kind of like this lovable thing. So it's like,
and it's so lovable right now for us, I don't think. And I know we got to get we don't have a ton of time to get to our trade deadline thing, but I got to ask at least, like, what was the reaction when you started seeing a team get off to this start and is currently still projected to be there? Well, like, what was kind of the vibes around White Sox fans? Like, okay, like we'll take the temporary 1 year slap on the wrist type of thing, and we could move on. That'd be pretty great if it was only 1 year.
Well, actually, I mean, I think more White Sox fans are focusing right now on just the bigger picture for the White Sox in terms of, can we just start to see, a little bit of ray of sunshine? But like, I've done a few episodes. I did do an episode, I think it was back in May. I did a segment or a brief segment, and I wrote something for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, that I write for, that, I just didn't think it was possible because, the Rockies play at Coors Field. I mean, you should be able to generate enough offense. I mean, how many for the history of the Rockies have they won games 10-9? Like, yep. I thought that would happen, that you would at least get the, dry air. I mean, I know they got the humidor. I know that they're trying to do everything to actually deaden offense, which to me, it's like, what, if I'm the Rockies, I would be building the most slugging power team I could possibly have and just find anybody that can throw, the ball, keep the ball down. That would be my pitching staff. That, build to your ballpark. It's like, that's the thing that just drives me nuts about the other reason why the incompetence of both like teams. The White Sox, for some reason, have stopped building power teams with left-handed pitching that can just dominate. That plays to right field, just like Coors Field. I'd be building a team that just mashes, and I'll find a way to win the extra 20 or 30 games I got to pick up on the road.
That's what they did when they made it to the playoffs, when Arenado and Story and LeMahieu and Charlie Blackmon were leading the way. And you mentioned this, something's got to give for both of these teams going into this series. The opening here, White Sox 9-34 on the road, Rockies 9-34 at home. Mere records here going into this thing. But let's talk some trade deadline here, because you mentioned how can things turn around for the Rockies. They need to tear it down to the studs. Anybody that's not going to be in the factor 3 to 5 years down the line needs to be a candidate for trade. Even with, there might be some hesitation for Rockies, but they got some comfortable contracts in Ryan McMahon, who you get a good third baseman with team control that you can move on from. His bat's inconsistent, and the Rockies are looking at him to be a middle of the lineup guy. He's never been there. The Rockies starters, even though I've mentioned they have issues, I don't know if Antonio Senzatella would get anything, but German Marquez continues to impress, continue to get better and better. And Kyle Freeland has been a very solid pitcher throughout his time. You'll look at his numbers, you'll kind of shriek a little bit, but look at how unlucky he's kind of been, and look at his career WAR. This is a guy that if you need a 3, 4, 5 in your rotation, he can do that. The Rockies aren't going to be blockbuster trades, but they have a lot of interesting guys that they can bring pieces back, because there are guys that are contributing to this team right now that aren't going to contribute in the future. And the Rockies just got win number 20 on July 3rd. So what are you worried about? Get what you can and move on and build the assets for the future.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, last year the White Sox were in the same boat in terms of, like, there was talk about, hey, we need to trade Garrett Crochet, and the only reason why they didn't trade Garrett Crochet was because he threatened to not pitch in the postseason without an extension. So that kind of soured everybody, but it was pretty much everybody must go because they had nothing in the system. Now the funny thing is the context kind of switches where, yeah, the front office, I think that, they want to be in asset acclimation mode, but at the same time, it's like, you know what? Some of the guys that you want to trade could actually provide some intangible value to help your young guys do this thing called maybe learn how to win. They have Mike Tauchman, who could be, the Chicago Cubs, for example, could probably use him back. But at the same time, for what the White Sox are going to get in terms of maybe a mid-tier prospect or even a low-tier prospect, it might be just better to have him on the team through the rest of the year, and he's under club control. So that's the interesting thing. Like, again, where the Rockies are is they've never done a sell-off, and they probably should. And the White Sox, they already did their sell-off, and now it's like, you know what, maybe some of the, besides Luis Robert Jr. and a couple of bullpen arms, it's like maybe you should just be looking to not move, because, do you get this feeling that, I just get this feeling that, again, the trend is going to continue. No top 100 prospect is going to change hands. It's going to be just nothing but maybe, teams top 30 prospects. But when it comes to like the MLB top, pipeline or whatever, no top 100 prospects going to change hands, because guess what? They're cheap potential players.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like the big question too for these two teams is just like, what can you really get for these guys? If you really look, I think that's a great point. If you're only going to get a lottery ticket draft, pick or a guy that's kind of like, and we'll see, or a veteran guy that's been good in your clubhouse and it's helping these guys out and will, not going to cost you much in the offseason or anything like that. I think that's an interesting spot for the White Sox to be in, where it's like teach to win. Whereas the Rockies have some guys where it's just like, you need to do that sell off, because as much as they can do the teach to win, their careers just aren't going to match up with these guys as they continue to develop. But I just don't know how many teams are going to be willing to do any sort of crazy type of, no top 100 prospects going to go in any of the deals. I think for the Rockies players, I don't think that there's anyone that would warrant that. Maybe a combo of the two. Jake Bird's actually been a pretty darn good reliever out of the bullpen for the Rockies. He's actually been an interesting option that could do. And Ryan McMahon's a Gold Glove caliber guy that can hit 20 home runs in a season, and maybe he gets into a different organization and they retool his swing a little bit so he doesn't strike out as much. There's certainly some intrigue here, but I totally get what you're saying there. But I think in the situation the Rockies are in, you got to do the sell-off because again, it's never happened, and you got to flush this one because it's already way out of line. And you got guys that you got enough intrigue guys that can make it, so you got a shot at avoiding the historical season.
All right, I'm going to push up us against the clock, but I definitely want to address this is I have now come to hate the MLB draft lottery rules, especially that prevents the taxpayers teams from being eligible for the lottery 2 years in a row, because at the end of the day, it's still not, I mean, incompetence is incompetence. Purposely tanking is one thing, but it just looks like both the White Sox and the Rockies just got to this point because they're incompetent, as we've been talking about. And again, for the looking like it will be now the second straight lottery in a row where the worst team will not get the number one pick. For the White Sox, it wasn't the end of the world because this is a draft that, is being rated as, good, not great, not, there's no real generation. It's next year's draft that they're saying that there's like 3 to 5 guys that could be really, really impact altering players. And the Rockies aren't going to get any of them.
Yeah, it just doesn't. The Rockies never had the number one overall pick either. They've never been able to land that. And now, yeah, that's what makes this extra frustrating, right? What is the incentive to be this bad this season, other than the fact that you had to cut costs and thought that you were on again? You believed your own kind of you believed in your system, you believed in your development, you believed in these arms returning. And trust me, I actually had the Rockies, this being the year that ricocheted off the rock bottom, and they were going to show some improvement here with the returning arms and the guys that we were hoping to have steps taken forward. So I think that this is just a situation where the draft, I can't just hold out hope for the draft. I think the Rockies' problems are not going to be solved for the draft through the draft, and the draft I think is kind of a flawed system. But at the same time, it's just like that's some stuff that always kind of like takes it to another. I mean, the baseball draft has already been always so confusing, and now it's just like now there's this. But I guess that's what my main frustration with the draft here was. There was no incentive to be this bad for the Rockies, and now here we are, and there's no benefit to this. There's no win at the end of it, because at least the Oklahoma City Thunder can say they won a championship and built all these draft picks. And I know it's a different sport, but it's just like, at least when teams are bad, they can kind of point to that, and the Rockies haven't done it. But I again have my hesitations about the Rockies' abilities to develop players as well in this current right now. Their track record hasn't necessarily been great.
Dude, I feel like I'm talking to a mirror of myself from last year, because when I was saying you don't know how many times I kept saying there's no silver lining to the White Sox being historically awful. There was no silver lining, because, and that's the other thing too that I just hate is, especially with how the draft is so confusing, is even though you're terrible, you can't get the benefit of that being terrible until a year later with how they have the draft now at the All-Star break. And yeah, you can't trade your first round pick, so like, for example, if you are that bad, you can't, accumulate more draft picks. It's just, that's why I'm like, I get it if it was like clear as day, oh my gosh, you are tanking like the Cubs and the Baltimore Orioles were doing last decade. But these are two situations where it's just inept front offices that allowed this team to become this bad. And yes, there was some frugality, but at the same time, it was just bad decision after bad decision that equaled these historically horrific. And even, you don't even technically need the top pick, next year's draft. It sounds like, again, you just need a top 5 pick, and the Rockies aren't going to get that benefit. Well, anyways, that wraps up this edition of this crossover edition of Locked On White Sox, Locked On Rockies. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox and Locked On Rockies your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get a local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. I'll be back tomorrow to discuss how the loser series went for the White Sox. What about you, Paul? What do you got what do you got on Monday?
We will be breaking down, hopefully, the Rockies maybe on a winning streak. If the Rockies can string together 2 wins to open this series, it will be one of the longest winning streaks of the season and a rare series win. So I'm actually intrigued. There's a lot of people are going to look at this as the worst series. I think it's going to be actually a lot more interesting with these two teams matching up, especially if you've been following along, those diehard White Sox and Rockies fans. They'll find something fun about this one.
Yeah, feel free to leave comments about today's discussion about the worst teams in baseball meeting up. You can either leave them on both of our episode pages. You can, tweet me at ToddJW or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at LockedOnWhiteSox@gmail.com. Paul, where can everybody leave a comment if you're on the Rocky side?
Best place to go is the Locked On Rockies YouTube channel. That's where we interact all the time, at Locked On Rockies on your socials as well. But best place to go is the Locked On Rockies YouTube channel.
All right, Paul, this is fun. Sorry that I cut you off on your final point, but we were running up against the clock there. And hopefully we can do this again sometime. Everybody have a great day. Have a great weekend, and we will see you Monday.